Hey everyone, I hope you are doing well. I decided to pop on because I wanted to share a lot of value with you. First of all, it is a very cold day in Toronto here. It is -7 and an awesome day to just stay in and do a live. So, the reason that I'm here is because I've been talking to a lot of leaders through consultation calls, through clients that I've been working with, and they've all been sharing with me how discouraged they feel in a role where they don't feel valued, where they're working hard, but they're not being well compensated. And they're taking on a lot of responsibility, dealing with a lot of challenges, creating incredible results for their organization, but they just feel undervalued because A, companies not paying enough for the amount of work that they're doing. They're burnt out, they're working long hours. And then the second thing is you might be around peers who are not as ambitious as you are. So when you're surrounded with those types of people, it's just demotivating. It really is. When you're an ambitious person, you want to keep growing, you want to feel challenged. And if you're surrounded by people who just want to like come to work and then just do their 9 to 5 without creating a ton of value, that's not a very inspiring environment to work in. Now, what I've been hearing from a lot of people is despite feeling that way, they stay in their roles. They don't look for other roles because they feel discouraged. The idea of applying for a ton of jobs, getting all the way till the eighth round of interviews is just not appealing. It feels a lot of work to the point that you're willing to suck it up in whatever role you're in. So I am here to give you hope because I have helped more than 1,000 leaders overcome this challenge. And the best way to fix a situation is to be aware of what your mistakes are. So if you're here, you're watching this live, or maybe you're watching the replay, I encourage you to really listen carefully and take notes because understanding what you're doing wrong is actually even more important than figuring out what to do because it's going to save you a lot of time. It's also going to save you a lot of money and it's going to save you a lot of headache. Okay, so I actually have a 3-step framework that I've tested over more than 1,000 professionals across multiple industries, more than 8 countries, different levels, different types of organizations, whether it's big tech, people who have landed at companies like Meta and Amazon, or startups, Fortune 500 organizations, multi-billion dollar organizations. This framework works. But today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on how to basically craft your career story. The thing that I have noticed with a lot of people is there isn't a clear understanding of what we mean when we talk about storytelling from the context of describing what we've done in our career. There's a lot of literature out there on how to be a great, public speaker by using storytelling, or how to be a great, marketer using storytelling, how to put together a TEDx talk using storytelling. But there's not a lot of specific information on how to do that as someone who is a job seeker, because you're not there to entertain people. You are there to persuade them that you are the right fit for a role. And you want to use storytelling in order to stand out as a professional. Now, we all know why storytelling is important, but in case you still have doubts, I want you to think about one successful leader and professional out there who doesn't have a story. You probably cannot name a single one who doesn't, right? In fact, I have used storytelling, especially for clients who had to navigate very complex career transitions. So, because they could not compete on title, because they could not compete on clout, what we ended up doing is actually leveraging story in order for them to achieve that goal. So, my client Tesse, there are a few things going on. First, she was new to Canada, so there was that hurdle. Second, she was going from being a doctor for many years, over a decade, to wanting to break into tech. And she did not want to start over. She wanted hiring managers to see her transferable experience, to see that, hey, I have built an amazing medical practice, which is essentially using a product like medical records in order to create value for my patients. And so I'm very capable of building a product, right? So we used her story in order to convince hiring managers that she can do the role and she doesn't have to start over. And that's how powerful storytelling is. Now, a lot of you, what goes on, your concept of story ends up being, I'm going to talk about my impact and my achievements, and I'm going to, stuff my resume and my interview answers with these impressive percentages, like reduced HR workload by 75% or secured a $1 million 3-year contract, thinking that if you do that, you're actually going to get the role, you're going to impress the hiring manager. But what's going on right now, especially with Chat GPT, is a lot of people can actually fake those numbers. And what's going on is when a hiring manager recruiter just sees that, it's not believable to them. And so I am going to help you understand how to change that. So here's a little analogy and a metaphor that I want you to think about to understand why just saying I, increased something by a certain percentage by doing XYZ, why that's not enough. So I want you to think of a doctor who tells you that they have a 90% success rate. Would you work with that doctor? Would you feel that that's convincing enough for you? Versus a doctor who says to you, I've treated a patient like you who had pancreatitis. And I share this from experience because I went through that and I had to find a surgeon that I could trust. And that surgeon basically said to me, I've treated a patient like you with pancreatitis who was constantly feeling nauseated and had a 6-centimeter cyst like you. And I was able to perform the surgery using keyhole surgery versus open surgery. And that person did not have to change their diet. They lived a pain-free life and with minimal scars. Guess who I decided to pick? I obviously picked the second person, right? Why? So if you're listening live, I'm curious to see what you think is the answer. And even if you're not watching live, I'm still going to see the comments. I want you to tell me, take the time to put in the comments why you think the second version is more compelling and more convincing. And then I want you to think for a moment back to what you're doing right now in your resume and in your interviews. Which one are you? Are you that person who just tells organizations that you decrease time or you reduce the workload or you increased, the revenue? Or are you that person who is very specific as to who you helped? You make it relatable to who you are persuading from a hiring manager perspective, and you show them that what you did was a big deal. Okay, so I want you to think about that for a moment, and I'm going to dig deeper into it. Okay, so in my program, in my coaching, I teach my clients a story building system that helps them persuade and influence, especially when they are leaders and executives. So this story building system is very different than what you're used to in terms of STAR framework and all of those other frameworks, because it is very much based on sales, influence, and marketing. I leverage my experience as someone who's been in the corporate world for 15 years, but I also leverage my experience working with a lot of marketers and understanding sales psychology. And that's how I came up with this system. So, the first thing that you want to think about, and I'll bring it back to one of my clients who shared with me that she was able to reduce, the team's workload by 75%. This is exactly what I asked her. I said, okay, let's start with who your heroes are. One of the biggest mistakes that a lot of people make is they think that they're the heroes and they have to prove themselves in the interview. But what you really need to do is you need to position yourself as the guide, and you need to focus less on yourself and more on who you've actually helped. So in this situation, I asked my client to be very specific. Who were you helping? And she shared with me that she was actually working with senior vice presidents across the bank who are very, very busy. So when you share that level of detail, instead of just saying, I decreased the workload by a certain percentage, and instead you tell the story behind it and you help the hiring manager and the recruiter through your resume and interview answer understand the types of people you were interacting with and at what level, it really showcases your leadership skills and your level of accountability, right? Because it's different when you're, let's say, yeah, I just worked with the team, or I just worked with a group of stakeholders, versus I worked with SVPs across the organization. So the context is extremely important. And what I see with a lot of resumes that have been watered down, that have been written by ChatGPT, or maybe you hired a resume writer or a personal brand strategist who doesn't have context of the corporate world, doesn't really have a deep understanding of what you've actually accomplished, they end up abbreviating what you've done, right? And a lot of the context is lost, a lot of the emotional connection is lost, a lot of the relatability is lost. So the second question that I asked my client, great, I understand who you helped and who you worked with. Now I want to understand, what is the actual problem that you solved? It can be I built a bunch of spreadsheets, or I did this process, or I built this product. We need to talk about the big why behind the problem and the reason that the company is spending tons of money hiring you in order to solve it. And so my client shared with me that employees were actually not logging into an HR platform that the bank has poured millions of dollars into. And what was happening was they were sending a ton of emails to HR, which was increasing their workload. You see how the context brings the story to life, right? And it helps us understand what was at stake and the importance of the initiative that my client was working on. The other thing that I coached my client on and asked her was, what was your actual role on the team in solving this? A big mistake that a lot of people do is they just talk about what they've built, but they don't, or they just say, yeah, I like made things efficient, but it's hard for us to understand, like, what was your role within the team? Who are you interfacing with? Who are you interacting with? So in this case, she shared with me that she was an L&D manager responsible for creating the entire training that would teach employees how to use this platform. So then we need to actually agitate the problem. We need to show the complexity. We need to show the adversity. The other thing that I see that a lot of people do wrong is they almost make it too easy what they've accomplished. And that what actually makes it less believable. And that comes from the hero mindset. I want to be a hero. I want to show I did amazing things, but I'm not really showing the adversity that I went through to make it happen. So it makes my role very simple, and it actually overly simplifies the impact of what I've done. So in this case, when I, went deeper with this client, she shared with me that the big challenge and the adversity that she had to go through is we're talking 10 SVPs, across the organization. They're all busy. They had different needs. So she had to align them. She had to build rapport with them. And how do we get them to agree? Right? So the next step after you describe the adversity and the hurdles to help people understand the complexity and the magnitude of what you've done is you need to talk about your unique approach. It can't just be like, oh, I facilitated these sessions and I put together these PowerPoint slides. It's got to be deeper than that. They want to see that you're an outside of the box thinker. How do you solve problems differently? So in her case, what was so impressive is that she actually pushed back in a way that was very diplomatic. She asked a very important question that really positioned her as a leader. And she asked those executives, hey, like, it seems to me like this platform is pretty intuitive. Is the issue that people don't know how to use it, or is it that they don't know about this platform? And maybe they're resistant to using it. Maybe we're not selling this platform enough to our employees. And that was a game changer question because it completely changed the trajectory of how that training was going to be designed. And rather than overloading the employees with how-to manuals, when that's not the problem that we're trying to solve, they ended up coming up with an external communication strategy and videos that actually sell employees on the benefit of using that platform. So we didn't go into the weeds of what she did, but we actually talked about her unique approach and what made her different. And then when you build up this entire story, then saying that I decreased the workload by 75% becomes believable. Then, we actually, even when we went through the story, she even remembered that not only did she decrease the workload by 75%, but she also added $90,000 in revenue. So I wanted to talk about this today because this is something that I commonly see across people's resumes when they communicate their value. And this is why you're not standing out. This is why you're not increasing your visibility. We tend to blame us not getting picked for an interview on, there are too many applicants and things like that. But sometimes we need to be humble and admit that maybe it's also the way that we're communicating our value. Because I actually see this not just from people who tell me that they apply for jobs through the application tracking system, but even when they're getting referred by their friends, coworkers, people they know to roles, they still don't get interviews, or they'll get the interview, but because the way the experience has been laid out is not specific, it's not compelling enough, they don't get traction. The thing is, when you're just spitting out numbers and you're describing things at a surface level, you're not creating that emotional connection with the hiring manager. The hiring manager wants to understand how you behave under stress, how you lead. Are you able to challenge people? If you just state numbers, that's not going to help, the hiring manager understand that. The second thing is when you're not being specific and you're not talking about who you worked with and the specific problem you solved and the context, what you're doing is you're not creating that relatability to that organization's specific situation in terms of who they want to hire and what type of role you're going to fill. And then the other thing is when you're also just being generic and sharing these numbers, this is how you blend in. This is how you don't stand out. So I hope you enjoyed this. As I mentioned in my program, this is just one component out of three that I help people with. The three components that I help people with is I help people understand their unique value proposition, what helps them stand out, what they need to focus on. We also work on articulating your experience, your career story. And then we also talk about how you show that executive presence in interviews. I hope you enjoyed this. If you have questions for me, feel free to post them in the comment. I'm also offering a limited number of consultation calls just for this month. I am only taking like very limited number of people to work one-on-one, mainly because I am really digging deeper and collecting more mistakes that people make, because I'll be launching a game-changing program in March. So this is the last opportunity to work with me one-on-one, especially at a discounted price before I launch my group program. So if you're interested, if you're curious, if you're that leader who is overwhelmed, by the idea of getting a better opportunity, just know that you deserve better. And if you have that burning desire to feel challenged, to me, having that burning desire is better than, and following through on it is better than wondering 10 years later while you're still in the same role, like, gosh, how would my life been different if I actually acted on it? Where would I be if I actually took action and changed my situation? All right. I hope you're all doing well. Happy Wednesday. I hope that you're warm wherever you are. And yeah, give me a like if you found this valuable. And if you want me to do more of these, let me know as well. All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye.